The vast obsidian hall of the Grand Conclave of Xylos was not merely built. It felt grown from the deepest, most ancient bedrock of the homeworld, its vaulted ceiling arcing impossibly high, studded with captured stellar dust that pulsed with the cold, uncaring light of distant galaxies. Beneath this celestial mockery, the assembled delegates of the 33 great houses regarded the holographic projection hovering above the central plinth, a shimmering, impossible construct, unlike anything catalogued in the known celestial atlases. It was a void rendered visible, a sheer absence of informational resonance shaped into a crude, metallic silhouette that defied every known principle of Xylan hydrodynamics and material science. The air, usually thick with the pheromonal consensus of established power, was brittle, charged with the static anxiety of profound uncertainty. Elder Cathar, whose millennia-long existence had weathered the slow collapse of minor constellations, extended a sensory filament, probing the projection's periphery, only to have his delicate probes recoil, registering nothing but null space clinging precariously to conventional matter. Fear, a sensation the Xylan hegemony had long suppressed through rigid doctrine and overwhelming technological superiority, was beginning to bloom, slow and toxic, in the collective psyche of the chamber. "It does not register conventional mass signatures," stated Advisor Vexus, his voice a dry rasp amplified through the conclave's acoustic dampeners, the sound somehow managing to carry the weight of planetary ruin. Vexus, keeper of the outer markings, gestured with a tripartite manipulator towards the readings flickering on the perimeter displays, readings that were frustratingly contradictory. Its displacement profile suggests a negligible presence, yet the gravitational distortion it exerts upon the local warp field echoes that of a nascent dwarf star. Explain this statistical impossibility, High Strategist Zidran. Zidran, draped in the ceremonial armor of the hegemony's military command, stood rigid at his designated podium, his multifaceted eyes locked onto the anomaly. His posture suggested control, but the minute tremor running through the articulated segments of his lower carapace betrayed the strain. The anomaly, which we have designated object designation, void trace, exhibits propulsion characteristics that violate causal mechanics as we understand them. It did not traverse established jump points. It simply was present beyond the Kuiper equivalent of the designated survey zone. Our long-range spectral analysis confirms a near-perfect albedo. It absorbs nearly all incident radiation. We see it only through gravitational lensing and the faint, localized ripple in the dark energy matrix it creates when maneuvering. It is, for all intents and purposes, cloaked in the vacuum itself. He paused, allowing the silence to deepen, pulling the weight of their collective apprehension into a focused point. And it bears the unmistakable markings of the Terran species. A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled houses. The Terrans, the mud primals of Sector Gamma 9, a species relegated in the official hegemonic archives to the designation of Class IV biological hazard, potential for self-termination within 2 standard centuries. Their classification was based on centuries of observation, chaotic social structures, primitive fusion technology, and an infuriating tendency toward internal conflict that consumed their limited resources. To see such an entity manifest a vessel capable of this level of stealth and spatial manipulation was not merely alarming. It was an ontological insult to the established order of the galaxy. Elder Cathar's consciousness pulsed with philosophical disquiet. Their societal metrics remain unchanged, Zidran, insignificant industrial output, primitive cultural memory. They squabble over minor atmospheric zones on their own sphere. How does a species obsessed with internal combustion engines and ideological schisms engineer a vessel that mocks the foundational mathematics of the great engines? This is not merely an evolutionary leap. It is a catastrophic error in the cosmic ledger. He focused his considerable mental presence on the central projection, attempting to discern the intent behind the vessel's inert posture. It has established a stationary orbit relative to the core world. It is waiting. What are its demands, if it possesses the capacity for such transit? No demands have been issued, Elder, Zidran reported, his tone hardening with the practiced detachment of military command. No transmission beyond standard, unencrypted, broadband electromagnetic noise, the crude, inefficient chatter they utilize for internal communication. Nothing directed toward us. It is a silent observation post. Silence is a weapon, hissed Delegate Lyra of the Industrial Combine, a creature whose entire civilization was built on the relentless processing of raw matter into sophisticated weaponry. Its silence is a precursor to overwhelming offensive deployment. We have deployed reconnaissance probes, have we not? What do the visual spectrum recordings show? Zidran projected a secondary image, a high-resolution rendering derived from multiple spectrum overlays, finally giving the delegates a clearer, though still deeply unsettling, view of the intruder. The vessel was immense, though its dimensions were hard to gauge due to the way it seemed to absorb ambient light. It was dark, aggressively angular, yet possessing an almost organic smoothness in its primary hull plating. There were no visible ports, no weapon emplacements readily identifiable by conventional means, no drive plumes venting waste energy. It looked like a shard of frozen midnight carved into the shape of predatory intent. It was the antithesis of Xylan aesthetics, which favored crystalline symmetry and luminous energy conduits. This ship was dark. It is a physical manifestation of threat, strategist, Cathar observed, his ancient mind struggling to categorize this profound deviation. It projects overwhelming capacity with zero overt signaling of intent. This suggests two possibilities: absolute confidence in immediate annihilation or a lack of capacity for conventional negotiation. Which is it? Vexus offered a chilling, entirely unquantifiable data point. My sensory arrays detected a minute thermal signature emanating from the structure's core, a sustained energy output roughly equivalent to the fusion reaction required to sustain a small habitat dome. For a vessel of that scale, traversing such distances, it implies an engine efficiency factor that borders on mythological. If they are running on the power output of a single geothermal plant to cross the void, then the energy density stored within their primary reactor must be astronomical. They are hiding power, Zidran, not lacking it. The political tension in the conclave thickened, the delegates recognizing the implications of Vexus's interpretation. If the humans possessed energy containment technology vastly superior to the hegemony's own, then the supposed technological gap, the very foundation of Xylan dominance in this galactic quadrant, had collapsed without a single shot fired. The arrogance that had fueled centuries of expansion curdled into cold dread. The Xylans were accustomed to encounters where lesser species begged for terms, where technological disparity was measured in multiples of order, 1,000 times slower FTL, 100 times less kinetic yield. This was different. This was a near-parity encounter, disguised by incomprehensible efficiency. Zidran finally allowed a hint of genuine concern to breach his military composure. We are mobilizing the first defense flotilla to maintain a perimeter outside the established exclusion zone. We will not approach within 500,000 kilometers until we ascertain their intent. Elder, I request authorization to deploy a low-frequency, non-aggressive communication ping, utilizing the standard galactic trade cadence. We offer dialogue. Cathar considered the request, dialogue. The Xylan term for it usually implied the dictated acceptance of terms, yet against this black, silent monolith, the concept felt desperately fragile. Authorization granted, strategist, but do not mistake caution for appeasement. If that void construct moves toward populated zones, we will neutralize the threat, regardless of the cost to conventional diplomatic precedent. Let us see if the primitives have learned any manners during their isolation. The low-frequency ping was broadcast, a steady, measured pulse of synthesized tones designed to communicate peaceful inquiry across vast cultural gulfs. The Xylan system waited, holding its collective breath within the grandeur of the obsidian hall. For several measured cycles, the black ship remained utterly unresponsive. The delegates watched the projected image, the sheer, silent indifference of the vessel a profound psychological weapon in itself. Then, against all expectation, a response arrived. It was not a broadcast. It was a focused, high-bandwidth transmission directed precisely at the conclave's primary diplomatic receptor banks. The data flooded the central processors, bypassing all standard Xylan encryption protocols as if they were transparent fog. The sheer volume of compressed information was staggering, a torrent meant to convey not just a message, but a detailed operational summary. When the translation matrix finally stabilized, rendering the complex Terran linguistic constructs into formalized Xylan philosophical syntax, the silence in the conclave became absolute, broken only by the faint, internal hum of life support systems, struggling to maintain atmospheric balance against the rising tide of political terror. The message contained a single, meticulously detailed data packet. It was not a demand, nor a threat, nor an alliance proposal. It was a schematic, a diagram of the vessel itself, rendered in perfect three-dimensional holographic detail, illustrating every subsystem, every power conduit, every articulated joint. Following the schematics was a detailed operational log, and at the very end, a single stark line of text, translated with chilling accuracy: "We are here for extraction. Cooperation is advised for efficiency." Vexus felt the cold dread solidify into existential nausea. "They are showing us their workings," he whispered, the horror in his voice evident. "They are offering a blueprint of their strategic hardware for our review. Why? This is not the action of an aggressive entity. It is the action of an entity certain of its superiority, treating us as specialized, if primitive, maintenance technicians." "Extraction of what?" Zidran demanded, his command protocols kicking in, seeking the hostile element. "What resources do they require that necessitate crossing interstellar voids with technology beyond our understanding? And why show us the design? It is an insult of the highest order." Cathar, however, saw the profound philosophical implication. "They are not hiding their capabilities, strategists. They are demonstrating them. If they wished to destroy us, they would have initiated localized cascade failure within our planetary defenses before we even registered their presence. They are treating us as a variable in a calculation they have already solved. They are offering us the means to understand their presence, suggesting that understanding is the only path to survival." He looked at the dark, silent ship, recognizing the deep cultural chasm. The Xylans dominated through obfuscation and layered defense. These Terrans operated through brutal transparency, masking their true power behind an edifice of overwhelming, casual capability. "We will accept the terms of communication. Zidran, prepare a designated diplomatic envoy. Send the arbiter of lesser spheres. We must approach this with the dignity of a species that still values its own history, even when faced with annihilation." The human vessel, which had remained utterly inert above the primary Xylan administrative world, reacted instantly to the Conclave's transmission of acceptance. There was no dramatic shift in orbit, no engine flare. Instead, a section of the dark hull, previously indistinguishable from the rest of the structure, retracted with an unnerving smoothness, revealing a docking aperture that glowed with a soft, internal azure light, a stark contrast to the oppressive obsidian of the ship's exterior. This light was non-threatening, deliberately inviting, a visual concession to the Xylan aesthetic preference for luminescence. The diplomatic envoy, the arbiter of lesser spheres, was a vessel painstakingly designed to project Xylan authority. Its exterior was plated with refractive crystal composites designed to scatter and reflect stellar light, appearing massive and multifaceted. It approached the aperture with painstaking slowness, every movement calculated to adhere to Xylan doctrine regarding non-aggressive, respectful approach protocols. As the arbiter settled into the docking embrace, the interior environment adjusted automatically, an unprecedented act of technological deference. The atmospheric pressure equalized, the temperature stabilized at a point empirically proven to be tolerable for standard Xylan biometrics, and the air filtration systems subtly scrubbed the residual Xylan-specific trace gases, replacing them with a neutral, breathable mixture. Inside the docking bay of the human vessel, the difference was immediate and jarring. The Xylan security contingent, clad in heavily armored containment suits designed to withstand localized plasma bursts, found themselves in a space defined by clean lines and stark utility. There were no complex energy conduits visible. The walls seemed monolithic, constructed from a material that felt warm to the touch and absorbed sound with disconcerting efficiency. The lighting was uniform, shadowless, emanating directly from the structure of the ceiling, a concept alien to the Xylans, who favored ambient, layered illumination to convey status and mood. The humans were already waiting. There were only 3 of them, standing near a centrally located, highly polished metal table. They wore what appeared to be simple utilitarian jumpsuits of a dark, unadorned fabric. They were bipedal, possessed a comparatively fragile bone structure, and their facial structure was dominated by large, forward-facing eyes that betrayed an almost unsettling degree of direct focus. They did not fidget, did not display any overt signs of threat or deference. They simply waited, hands clasped loosely behind their backs, their posture betraying an almost impossible degree of practiced stillness. The leader of the Xylan delegation, the diplomatic emissary Thuron, stepped forward. Thuron was a creature of calculated grandeur. His ceremonial robes were spun with microfilaments that shifted color based on his subconscious emotional state. Today, a deep, unshifting indigo denoting severe political caution. "We are the hegemony of Xylos," Thuron stated, his voice modulated to carry the full, practiced resonance of interstellar diplomacy. "You have trespassed into sectors under our established protection. We request immediate clarification regarding your origin, your intent, and the nature of the vessel you command, which utilizes methodologies outside the known parameters of relativistic physics." The central human figure, a female, judging by the subtle morphological differences, stepped forward by a single pace. Her expression was utterly neutral, yet her gaze held a density that seemed to probe Thuron's very cognitive processes. "We are the representatives of the unified Terran mandate," she stated. Her voice was smooth, possessing a surprising clarity and pitch range, lacking the harsh clicks and sibilant inflections common to many species in the sector. It sounded uncomplicated. "My designation is First Contact Specialist Alara Vance. There has been no trespass. We arrived via calibrated space-time translation. We have established an observable position for diplomacy. The vessel is designated Dauntless. Its function is the delivery of personnel and materiel." Thuron felt a flicker of irritation at the sheer banality of the response. "Delivery? To where? You have infiltrated a strategic location without prior diplomatic notification, displaying technology that suggests a capacity for galactic destabilization. We require context for this action, Specialist Vance. We observe your vessel's energy signature. It appears dormant, yet capable of instantaneous maneuverability. This discrepancy is untenable for peaceful coexistence." Alara Vance tilted her head fractionally, a gesture that might have been curiosity or mere biometric adjustment. "The vessel is not dormant. It is maintaining a low-power, minimal signature profile optimized for non-provocation. Its energy signature reflects our current operational capacity, controlled efficiency. We are here to extract a specific biological specimen that we determine to be of critical importance to our own continuation. That specimen is currently maintained within the restricted sublevels of your planetary repository archive. Designation: Delta 7. The air in the docking bay seemed to freeze. Delta 7 was not a public facility. It was the repository for species deemed biologically volatile or critically rare, protected not for their value, but for their danger to the galactic ecosystem. It was an ecological quarantine zone overseen directly by the Conclave's most senior biological stewardship committee. "You have identified a specimen within a protected quarantine sector?" Thuron asked, his indigo robes beginning to show faint, stress-induced striations of pale violet. "What specimen commands the deployment of a ship capable of negating known physics? And how did you ascertain its precise location within a sealed archive protected by multi-spectrum cryptographic sequencing?" Alara Vance met his gaze without flinching. "The specimen is designated Homo sapiens Terra variant 14.3, a specific genetic lineage, critically divergent from the primary recognized Terran genetic baseline. We require its repatriation. The location was determined through passive decryption of your archive's public-facing metadata structure, correlated with open-source planetary cultural analysis performed over the last 3 standard cycles. Your encryption protocols, while robust against localized kinetic threats, rely too heavily on sequential complexity rather than true entropic shielding. They are, fundamentally, predictable." The delegates accompanying Thuron began to radiate low-level, distressed pheromones. Predictable. Their most guarded secrets, their supposed impregnable security, laid bare by an observation period that equated, in hegemonic terms, to a brief afternoon interlude. "You speak of unpredictability in our security, Specialist Vance," Thuron countered, striving to regain the upper hand by focusing on the cultural insult. "Yet your own actions are the definition of galactic disruption. Why not petition the Conclave through established diplomatic channels? Why the deliberate display of overwhelming, opaque power?" Alara Vance's expression softened infinitesimally, the first discernible sign of human emotional engagement, and it was one of mild, perhaps even pitying, explanation. "The hegemony of Xylos has defined its operational doctrine around the visible application of force and the structured exchange of resources, predicated on maintaining a clear hierarchy of power. We do not operate within that framework. To petition through your channels would necessitate acknowledging the legitimacy of your jurisdiction over our own genetic lineage, a premise we cannot accede. PT. Furthermore, the time required for bureaucratic negotiation would exceed the viability window for the specimen in question." Viability window? Thuron demanded, leaning forward. What danger does this specimen pose to itself that cannot be mitigated by our advanced xenobiological containment? The danger is existential, emissary, Vance replied. This individual, this specific genetic expression, carries the cognitive marker required to activate a contingency signal that secures the future of our entire species in the face of an impending, sector-wide threat. A threat, I must inform you, that the hegemony has not yet detected, but which your own deep space sensors will register within the next 50 standard rotation cycles as a massive, rapid approach vector. The sheer audacity of the claim that a species considered barely viable could foresee a threat the hegemony had missed was staggering. Zidran, alerted by the escalating tension, transmitted a priority encrypted query from the conclave chamber. What threat? Vance did not check the communication. She simply addressed Thuron as if the entire hegemonic structure were participating in this localized dialogue. We are not here to negotiate galactic politics, emissary Thuron. We are here to secure essential personnel. The Xylan political structure is irrelevant to this immediate objective. We offer you the opportunity to withdraw your security detail from Delta 7 and receive, in exchange, comprehensive threat assessment data for the approaching vector. This is the extent of our diplomatic exchange. Thuron realized the stark, terrifying truth. They were not dealing with an equal power, nor even a superior one. They were dealing with an external force that saw the Xylan hegemony as an environmental feature, an obstacle of mild inconvenience, possessing useful, if flawed, databases. The arrogance of the humans was not born of hubris, but of sheer, cold calculation regarding their own indispensable necessity. This specimen, Thuron insisted, driven by centuries of political conditioning, if it is indeed Terran, is classified under the galactic mandate of non-interference as protected heritage. To forcibly remove it constitutes an act of war against Xylan sovereignty. Vance offered a gesture that was entirely alien to Xylan culture, a slight, almost imperceptible raising of the upper hand, palm open, signifying cessation of argument. Emissary, we understand sovereignty, but we are operating under a different priority structure. We are not interested in your territory or your resources. We are interested only in the genetic integrity of our own species when the true dangers of the void arrive. We will bypass your security measures if necessary, but doing so would consume resources that could be better spent preparing your own infrastructure for the incoming crisis. The calculation is simple. Resistance costs you time and resources you do not possess. Compliance costs you nothing except the temporary relocation of one biological unit. The Xylan security detail bristled, energy conduits glowing faintly under their armor. They were trained to react to insult with overwhelming force. But Vance's calm, logical presentation of undeniable technological superiority short-circuited their aggression protocols. To fight would be to prove her point, that they were primitive, reactionary creatures unable to grasp the higher mathematics of survival. We require confirmation of the nature of this approaching threat, Thuron stated, his voice strained. If you claim knowledge of an existential danger unseen by the hegemony, you must provide verifiable data supporting this claim before any repatriation can be considered. Vance nodded once, accepting the prerequisite. Agreed. We anticipated this demand for verification. Follow us. She turned and moved towards a bulkhead that shimmered, resolving into a portal of pure, filtered light. The two accompanying human technicians moved with her, displaying the same unnerving economy of motion. Thuron hesitated only a moment, the cold dread battling with the ingrained duty to protect the archive. He signaled his security chief, a silent order. Observe. Do not engage unless the specimen is visibly harmed. Following the humans onto, the Dauntless was stepping into a radically different understanding of reality. The internal volume of the ship was immense, far exceeding the external silhouette the Xylans had observed. It utilized spatial folding not just for transit, but for internal architecture, allowing vast, complex environments to exist within a seemingly constrained hull. A technological leap that instantly repositioned the hegemony centuries behind the Terrans. They were led not to a bridge or a weapon control center, but to a chamber dominated by a single, massive holographic display. It showed a sector of the galaxy far beyond the established Xylan sphere of influence, a region previously considered empty and stable. This is what your primary sensors have failed to resolve, Vance stated, gesturing to the projection. The image resolved, showing a colossal wave front not of energy or debris, but of organized, self-replicating, non-biological construct. It was a tide of engineered matter moving at near-light velocity, consuming stars as fuel, converting entire planetary systems into its own mass for exponential growth. The silent tide, as we call it, Vance explained, her tone still utterly level. It is a self-optimizing civilization consuming energy and biomass at a rate that ensures sector extinction within 5 standard years, based on its current vector. Your star charts show a void there. We show you the reality of what is currently occupying that void. The Xylan delegation stared, their sophisticated minds struggling to process the scale of the threat. This was not a local dispute. This was the end of organized life in this region of the cosmos. The hegemony, with all its diplomatic power and ancient fleets, had been concerned with border skirmishes and trade disputes, entirely unaware that the foundations of their existence were about to be scoured clean by an elemental cosmic force. How can this be? Thuron managed, the composure finally dissolving. Our deep-field gravitational scanners detect predictable anomalies, Vance interrupted gently. The silent tide utilizes a localized space-time dampening field that masks its gravitational signature from standard array sweeps. It only becomes apparent when it is too close to intercept conventionally. We developed countermeasures against this specific type of camouflage during our early colonial expansion phases, a survival strategy rooted in our own early internecine conflicts over energy resources. We learned to hide in the noise. She paused, allowing the implications of that statement, that the humans had developed countermeasures to existential threats so profound that the dominant powers had not even categorized the threats themselves, to settle heavily. The specimen in Delta 7, designated Subject Elian Vance, carries a unique neural architecture, a specific rare mutation of the human frontal lobe structure. This structure is necessary to interface directly with the activation sequence of the oversight beacon, a legacy device we left scattered across the galaxy millennia ago as a final failsafe against threats exactly like the tide. You have inadvertently sequestered the key to sector survival. Thuron looked from the terrifying tidal wave of metal consuming light years to the calm, competent human standing before him. He saw the abyss opening beneath the Xylan hegemony, a void of ignorance far deeper than the vacuum the Terran ship traveled through. And if we refuse to relinquish Subject Elian? Thuron asked, the question a formality, his certainty already shattered. Vance's neutral expression finally shifted, gaining a cold, hard edge that was far more intimidating than any overt threat. Then we will be forced to extract him. We will neutralize your security apparatus with minimal collateral damage to surrounding infrastructure. We will treat your resistance as predictable, resource-intensive behavior common to developing apex species. We respect your autonomy, emissary, but the continuation of established life forms across this quadrant takes precedence over the temporary political sovereignty of one sector's administrative hub. The time for debate regarding abstract concepts like sovereignty ended when the tide entered your observable horizon. The political fallout within the conclave, relayed instantly by the terrified security detail aboard the Arbiter, was catastrophic. Elder Cathar, informed of the silent tide and the Terran counter-technology, found his millennia of philosophical and political certainty reduced to ash. The hegemony's entire doctrine, based on the slow, observable accumulation of power and the suppression of unpredictable variables, had been rendered obsolete in a single exchange. The debate in the Obsidian Hall was no longer about defense. It was about rapid, humiliating capitulation and the acquisition of essential knowledge. They treat us as children guarding a vital toy, spat Delegate Lyra, her manipulators shaking violently. Their entire presentation screams of ancient, weary power. They speak of legacy systems, oversight beacons, as if they were casually scattering cosmic tripwires across the void before vanishing for epochs. They are not a rising power, Cathar. They are the inheritors of a forgotten galactic mandate. Vexus, the keeper of markings, struggled to analyze the Terran data packets, the technical schematics they had so freely provided. Elder, their material science. It is built upon principles we dismissed as theoretical decay physics. They utilize localized manipulation of the Planck density field to achieve structural integrity. Their ship, the Dauntless, is not built of auto. MS bonded by conventional electromagnetism, it is held together by manipulated space-time curvature. It should collapse under its own stresses, yet it functions perfectly. They have mastered the fine tuning of reality itself. Cathar processed this with grim resignation. The arrogance of the Xylan hegemony had blinded them to the possibility that a species they had categorized as insignificant might be playing a game on a timescale and a complexity level far beyond their comprehension. Humanity, it seemed, was not merely advanced. It was anciently adapted, having survived deeper cosmic horrors than the Xylans had ever dared to contemplate. Strategist Zidran, Cathar projected, his voice echoing with newfound humility. What is the status of the security detachment at Delta 7? Have they initiated hostile countermeasures? Zidran's report was immediate and bleak. No. The detachment commander reported that the human representatives entered the facility with an escort of 6 automated entities, unarmed, silent, and moving with impossible precision. They bypassed 3 layers of kinetic and energy barriers by simply occupying the transitional phase states between the barrier's operational frequencies. The commander reported that attempting to raise a shield would have risked catastrophic power feedback into the archive core. They are retrieving subject Elian Vance now. Our military force is currently paralyzed by strategic inertia. To fire upon the Dauntless is to invite certain, immediate, and comprehensive destruction of our homeworld without even slowing their objective. The philosophical weight of the situation pressed down upon the conclave. They had built their empire on control, on hierarchy, on the predictable exploitation of lesser species. Now they faced an entity whose control was absolute, whose unpredictability was a function of supreme confidence, and whose ethics, though difficult to parse, seemed entirely focused on planetary preservation over political domination. We must align, Cathar concluded, the decision instantaneous and necessary for the survival of trillions. The tide is an extinction event. The Terrans possess the antidote, and they have demonstrated the capacity to enforce their will. Our only remaining leverage is our utility. Cathar addressed the collective of the conclave, his voice resonant with the gravity of epoch-defining choice. Delegates, we have mistaken nascent adolescence for developmental deficiency. The Terrans operate on a philosophical plane where survival against fundamental cosmic entropy is the primary driver. Their actions are not hostile, they are surgical. They are not conquering. They are harvesting the necessary component for sector-wide defense. We must demonstrate, immediately and unequivocally, our willingness to integrate our data and resources into their framework. He ordered the immediate, uncensored transmission of all Xylan astrophysical data regarding the approaching vector, along with every available sensor reading of the region encompassing the silent tide. It was a desperate offering, the entire accumulated knowledge of a major galactic power surrendered in a single burst of desperate communication. Within moments, the Dauntless relayed a confirmation signal. It was not a message of thanks, but an acknowledgement of receipt, data integrated. Processing efficacy 98.7%, efficiency improved. The return of Specialist Vance and her contingent to the Xylan delegation aboard the Arbiter was marked by a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The Xylans, stripped bare of their presumed technological superiority, projected an aura of profound, almost sacred, deference. The specimen has been secured, Vance reported, settling back at the table with the same unnerving calm. Subject Elian Vance is stabilized and is currently interfacing with the beacon activation sequence. The estimated time to full deployment is less than 72 local hours, which is significantly faster than our projections anticipated, thanks to the supplementary data you provided regarding local spatial distortions. Your sensor calibration proved useful. Thuron, swallowing his pride, asked the question that hung over every Xylan in the vicinity. Specialist Vance, why this method? Why risk confrontation with the hegemony over a single individual? Why not simply initiate the beacon from your own vessel, if your technology is so vastly superior to ours? Vance looked at the emissary, her large, dark eyes conveying a depth of experience that seemed to span ages. Because the beacon requires multiple nodal points to establish a stable gravitational anchor strong enough to repel the tide's advance across the entire quadrant boundary. The Dauntless can initiate the primary anchor, but we require at least 3 subsidiary nodes operating in concert to achieve the necessary field saturation. The Xylan core world and the next 2 major resource satellites possess the appropriate planetary mass and energy output to serve as those nodes. She leaned forward slightly, transitioning from reporting to explaining strategy with the detached air of a teacher instructing a new student. We did not wish to conquer your infrastructure. We needed to utilize it. To seize it would require tactical deployment of force that would exhaust our reserves before the actual engagement with the tide. By establishing a diplomatic exchange, however strained, we secure willing participation, ensuring the nodes remain stable and operational during the critical synchronization phase. Willing participation, Thuron repeated, the phrase tasting alien on his own vocalizer. You value cooperation even when you possess the capacity to compel obedience. Coercion breeds inefficiency, Vance stated simply. Resistance diverts computational cycles away from the primary objective. The Terran mandate values logic above all else. The most logical pathway to survival is the one that minimizes unnecessary entropy. Furthermore, Emissary Thuron, you mistake our intent. Mistake your intent? Yes, we are not fundamentally different from the hegemony in our ultimate goal, the preservation of self and civilization. We merely operate on a different temporal scale and face a different class of threat. We do not engage in galactic governance because we do not require subject species or tributary states. We require allies who can maintain stable operational nodes while we deal with the existential problem. The hegemony is useful. Your fleets, once repurposed, can serve as an early warning buffer against any immediate, unexpected fragmentation from the tide as it is repelled. This was the full scope of the human worldview, a philosophy of absolute pragmatism rooted in self-preservation, yet extending to a reluctant, highly conditional stewardship of the surrounding stellar environment. They were not altruistic saviors. They were highly pragmatic custodians who understood that a stable neighborhood was essential for long-term survival. Vance then initiated the next phase of her explanation, a presentation that dwarfed the schematic of the Dauntless. It displayed not just the silent tide, but its origin point, extrapolated across unimaginable distances. The silent tide is merely a symptom, emissary. It is a self-propagating, automated ecological correction mechanism deployed by an older, far less forgiving intelligence residing beyond the galactic core. We refer to this originator intelligence as the architects. The architects do not communicate. They prune. They view emergent complexity, civilizations that reach a certain threshold of energy manipulation, as an unstable variable requiring correction to maintain the galactic equilibrium they established eons ago. Thuron felt a cold horror that eclipsed even the fear of the tide. The Xylan hegemony had always viewed itself as the pinnacle of evolution, the ultimate expression of ordered sentience. Now, they were being told they were merely reaching the noise floor of a cosmic weeding process. You are suggesting, Thuron managed, his voice strained with the weight of this new, crushing perspective, that the Terrans have encountered and survived direct confrontation with these architects before. We have survived the first wave, Vance confirmed, her eyes momentarily distant, perhaps recalling histories that span light years and cosmic epochs. Our species was seeded in the outer rims of this galaxy, primarily to survive the inevitable cleansing cycles triggered by the architects. We were designed, in essence, as a galactic firebreak. Our primitive, chaotic social development was not a flaw. It was a necessary evolutionary shield against cognitive capture by older intelligences. This explained everything. The apparent lack of ambition for large-scale political control, the focus on sheer technological efficiency over military display, the ability to hide in the noise. They were not primitives. They were highly specialized survivors, intentionally decentralized and technologically esoteric to evade the notice of the true galactic regulators. The oversight beacon, Zidran's voice crackled through the secured channel from the conclave, momentarily overriding Thuron's command over the transmission feed. Is it a weapon against the architects themselves? Vance acknowledged the strategist's abrupt intervention with a slight nod of respect. No, the architects are too vast, too woven into the fabric of causality to be destroyed by any single mechanism. The beacon is a displacement field generator. When activated by a specific, genetically resonant consciousness, it will generate a localized, highly ordered spacetime bubble around this entire galactic arm. It will effectively push this entire section of the galaxy out of the known spatial coordinates utilized by the architects for navigation. It will grant us the necessary time, perhaps 100 millennia, to adopt truly effective countermeasures, or to relocate entirely. The revelation was staggering. Humanity was not offering salvation. They were offering escape, a cosmic exile secured by the sacrifice of their own specialized genetic lineage. The inherent ethical complexity was profound. They were willing to expend one of their own, not as a sacrifice in battle, but as a key to initiate an exodus for an entire sector of life. The ethical framework of the Terran mandate, Thuron murmured, trying to grasp the morality behind such an action. It is centered on the continuation of the species at any cost, even at the cost of temporary political stability in allied systems. Our ethics are focused on data persistence, Vance corrected him. The universe is hostile, entropy is the inevitable winner. Our goal is to ensure that Terran consciousness and the knowledge accrued over our long history of survival persists beyond the next cosmic pruning. We view the allied systems as potential nodes for persistence. If you survive with us, your knowledge persists. If you do not, that knowledge, and the resource base required to leverage it later, is lost. It is a practical, long-term investment in universal complexity. The next 72 hours were a blur of intense, high-stakes cooperation under the looming threat of annihilation. The Xylan hegemony mobilized its entire administrative and logistical apparatus, not in defense, but in support of the human operation. The internal political friction evaporated, replaced by the unifying terror of the silent tide and the strange, quiet competence of the Terran technicians. On the core world, the primary conclave hall was converted into an operational coordination center. Elder Cathar stood beside Specialist Vance, monitoring the synchronization across the three major planetary nodes. The humans had installed proprietary interfaces, elegant, minimalist consoles that communicated complex data streams through direct neural feedback, requiring the Xylan technicians to adapt rapidly to a system that bypassed conventional visual processing in favor of raw conceptual transfer. Node 1 synchronization approaching 80% integrity, Vance reported, her voice low but firm, monitoring the power drain from the Xylan homeworld's planetary core tap. Emissary Thuron, the feedback loop from the fusion regulators indicates minor oscillation at the tertiary containment field. If this continues, the node integrity will drop below the critical threshold required for the beacon's anchor phase. Thuron, who had spent the last 2 cycles learning to parse the Terran concept of data flow velocity, felt a sudden surge of professional adrenaline. This was engineering, a realm where the hegemony excelled, even if the underlying physics were alien. Zidran, redirect auxiliary power from the orbital defense matrix directly to the tertiary containment conduits. Bypass all standard stabilization governors. We need raw throughput now. Zidran, now functioning as the Xylan liaison for military engineering, executed the command without hesitation. The lights in the conclave flickered violently as unimaginable power was rerouted. The holographic readout showed the oscillation immediately dampened, the energy flow stabilizing into a smooth, powerful current. Integrity back to 99.4%, Vance confirmed, a flicker of something akin to approval in her eyes. Remarkable efficiency under pressure, Emissary. Your species possesses considerable capacity when focused on a single, verifiable threat. We are simply performing the function for which we were designed, Specialist Vance, Thuron replied, using the very logic the humans had imposed upon them. Preservation of the local environment when confronted by an external, higher-order destructive element. As the synchronization proceeded, the tension mounted. The external sensors confirmed the approach of the silent tide. While still distant, its leading edge was beginning to warp the local background radiation signature in ways that were unmistakably violent. It was closing fast, a creeping doom manifesting in the empty spaces between the stars. Beacon initiation sequence commencing, Vance announced 30 cycles later. Subject Elian Vance is confirmed to be in full resonance, preparing primary node activation. A profound silence descended upon the conclave. On the main view screen, the projection of the distant, cold light of the beacon, a device the humans had placed millennia ago, awaiting this exact moment, began to pulse. It was a slow, heavy beat, echoing the terrifying heartbeat of impending cosmic separation. The 3 nodes, the human Dauntless and the 2 massive Xylan planetary infrastructures, began to feed energy into the beacon system. The energy demand was catastrophic, pulling the entire known industrial capacity of the region to its absolute limit. Primary node lock achieved, Vance breathed. Secondary nodes align your phase. Shift vectors to the beacon's output frequency. We need absolute coherence, or the displacement field will fracture upon entry, ripping apart the very solar systems we intend to save. The hours stretched into an agonizing eternity. The Xylan engineers, under the calm, relentless direction of the Terran specialists, pushed their ancient, reliable technologies beyond any theoretical operational limit. They watched the tide of metal advance, an unstoppable geological phenomenon made manifest in space. Then Cathar observed something anomalous on the periphery of the external sensor feed, something that had nothing to do with the silent tide. "Specialist Vance," Cathar interrupted, projecting the anomalous reading directly onto her interface. "While monitoring the beacon's energy draw, our deep-spectrum scanners detected an emission burst from the region immediately adjacent to the original Terran vessel's arrival coordinates. It is a focused, non-directional signal, older than the hegemony itself. It appears to be a navigational beacon." Vance, completely absorbed in maintaining the coherence of the displacement field, glanced at the data feed with a momentary distraction. Her eyes widened, a rare, genuine expression of surprise crossing her face. "That signal," she murmured, her professional calm momentarily fractured. "That is an alpha-band distress frequency. We believed every transmitter of that era had been extinguished or corrupted." Thuron seized the opportunity presented by this shared moment of uncertainty. "Alpha band? What is its context, specialist? Does it relate to the architects?" Vance shook her head, her focus returning instantly to the stabilization effort, but now tinged with a new, complex apprehension. "No, the architects utilize automated, silent corrective fields. The Alpha Band was the communication protocol of the species that preceded them in galactic governance, the ones who established the initial spatial demarcation lines, the ones who built the beacon system." She stabilized the node feedback, ensuring the survival of the arm was locked in place. "Emissary Thuron, strategist Zidran, listen carefully. The beacon will initiate the displacement sequence in T-60 seconds. It will shunt this entire system into a pocket dimension optimized for survival against the tide. However, the signal you detected is emanating from a massive structure located precisely where the beacon is targeting its exit vector." The holographic display showing the beacon's destination flickered, and a new image overlaid it, a structure of impossible scale, far exceeding even the Dauntless in its material complexity. It was an ancient megastructure, partially cloaked but undeniably artificial, orbiting a star millions of light-years away. "What is that structure?" Zidran demanded, his voice laced with utter disbelief. "It rivals the scale of a Type III civilization." "It is the origin of the beacon itself," Vance explained rapidly, urgency bleeding into her voice. "The species that built the beacon, the ones who foresaw the architects, did not leave a simple get-out-of-jail-free card. They left a refuge. The Alpha Band signal is a homing beacon for the last survivors of that era, awaiting the moment the beacon activation would clear the spatial interference caused by the tide's proximity. They are waiting for us." The silent tide was now visible on the edge of the sensor range, its massive, consuming front beginning to cause noticeable stress on the outer planetary orbital fields. There was no more time for philosophical debate. "Our mission," Vance concluded, her voice regaining its unwavering clarity, "was to extract the key subject Alian Vance to activate the escape route. We have succeeded. Now the new objective supersedes all others. We must move the Xylan hegemony and every species within this arm into the refuge left by the true predecessors of this galaxy, before the architects consume our current position. The survival protocol has just been upgraded from simple evasion to genuine integration with a civilization far beyond our current comprehension." The countdown reached its final moments. The three energy taps across the sector poured their unimaginable output into the beacon. The Xylan delegates braced themselves, a unified mass of terror and nascent hope. "T-5 seconds," Vance stated. The vast, dark silhouette of the Dauntless seemed to pulse once, absorbing the final surge of energy. The air in the conclave grew heavy, the very atoms in the room seemingly vibrating against their will. 4, 3, 2, 1, engage. A silent, colossal wave of energy erupted from the beacon's targeted location, propagating instantaneously across the sector. It was not a wave of destruction, but of displacement, a tearing away from the known universe. The stellar field displayed on the main screen did not explode or collapse, it simply shifted. The oppressive obsidian hall of the Xylan Conclave, which had housed millennia of proud, arrogant governance, flickered, the ancient stardust ceiling dissolving into a swirling vortex of impossible color before snapping back into focus. The ceiling was gone. Above them was not the captured stellar dust, but the sheer, unobstructed blackness of an unknown void, pierced by stars arranged in patterns completely alien to the Xylan charts. And dominating the view, impossibly close now, filling half the newly visible sky, was the structure from the Alpha Band signal, a structure so large it defied description, a lattice of perfect geometry bathed in soft, internal amber light. It was a cosmic city, an artificial sanctuary built by a species that had mastered survival across epochs. "Welcome, Xylos," Specialist Vance said softly, standing amidst the disoriented Xylan leadership, the darkness of her ship now reflecting the brilliance of this new, colossal horizon. "Welcome to the long game. Humanity was merely the lock-picker. You are now standing at the gatehouse of the true frontier." The fear remained, deep and visceral, but now it was tempered by a powerful, unexpected surge of purpose. The humbling realization that they were no longer the dominant players in the galactic theater, but crucial new members of an ancient alliance, awakened by the terrifyingly pragmatic ethics of the human species, to face the true, silent dangers of the cosmos. The age of Xylan hegemony was over. The age of unified survival had begun.